Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're standing at a very strange intersection. If you look down one road, you have medieval theology. Look down another, you see quantum astrophysics. Down the third is evolutionary biology. And the fourth is paved with ancient Eastern philosophy.
That sounds like a chaotic map.
It does, but all these roads are trying to lead to the exact same destination.
Yeah, are. We're tackling, well, the oldest question in the human playbook, why? And specifically, we're looking at the architecture of belief.
Right.
Not just what people believe, but how the concept of a supreme being is constructed, whether that's through logic or the laws of physics or, the wiring of our own brains.
We have a massive stack of sources today. We're going to be pulling from the Summa Theologica of Thomas Aquinas, the personal diaries of Albert Einstein, Buddhist sutras, and even modern fMRI studies of Franciscan nuns.
A wide net.
A very wide net. But before we get into heavy text, I want to start with an image. It's one everyone knows. Michelangelo's creation of Adam on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Oh, absolutely. Iconic. You have God on the right, floating in that swirling cloud of reddish drapery, reaching out to touch the finger of Adam.
It's the quintessential image of the divine spark.
It is.
Right. Now, in our first source, there is a theory proposed by a neuroanatomist, a man named Franklin Meshberger, that completely flips how you see that painting.
It really does.
Meshberger argues that if you look at the shape of that cloud or shroud surrounding God and the angels, well, it isn't just a cloud. He claims it's an anatomically accurate cross-section of the human brain.
And he's not just, seeing shapes in the clouds here. He points to very specific details. The outline of the drapery corresponds to the Sylvian fissure, which divides the brain's lobes.
And the leg of the angel hanging down, that corresponds to the pituitary gland. He thinks Michelangelo, who we know performed dissections, was hiding a neurological diagram in plain sight.
Which is the perfect setup for where we're going.
It is. It poses a visual question. Is the painting showing God bestowing the gift of intellect, the brain upon man?
Or is the artist secretly suggesting that the concept of God is actually a product of the human brain?
That is the central tension of this deep dive. Is God a discovery we made about the universe, or is God an invention of our biology?
And just to be clear to you listening, our mission here isn't to convert you or deconvert you. We aren't preaching.
No. We're analyzing God as a civilizational pivot point. So let's start with the foundation, the logic.
Phase 1, the philosophical arguments. And we go back to the 13th century. You have Thomas Aquinas. What stands out in the readings is that he wasn't just saying, have faith.
No, he was trying to prove it.
He was trying to prove God exists using hard, rigorous logic.
This is from the Summa Theologica. Aquinas proposed the 5 ways to demonstrate God's existence.
Right, and you have to understand his mindset. Aquinas didn't think God was self-evident. You can't just know God directly with the human mind.
So you have to work backwards.
You have to look at the effects, the physical universe, and reason backward to the cause.
Let's unpack the most famous one, the unmoved mover. It sounds a bit abstract, but it's really about physics and change.
It is. It's the argument from motion. Aquinas observes that everything in the world is changing. He calls it moving from potentiality to actuality.
So like a piece of wood, it has the potential to be a hot fire, but it's currently cold.
Exactly. It needs something else, a spark, some friction to actually become fire.
The wood doesn't ignite itself, something has to act on it.
Precisely. And that spark was caused by a striker, which was moved by a hand, which was moved by a muscle. But Aquinas argues that this chain of dominoes, it can't go back forever. This is the whole concept of avoiding an infinite regress.
Because if the chain is infinite, there's no beginning. And if there's no beginning, then there's no motion happening right now.
Exactly. Logic dictates there has to be a first domino, something that pushes but doesn't get pushed, something that is purely actual with no potential left. And this unmoved mover, Aquinas says, is what we understand to be God.
He also has the argument from contingency, which I found even more, existential.
It is. It's about whether things need to exist.
Right.
Think of it this way. Everything in our experience is contingent. That means it implies the possibility of not existing. You exist, but you might not have. A star exists, but it will eventually die.
So everything is temporary. Everything has an expiration date.
Right. Now, Aquinas plays this out. If everything in the universe were contingent, if everything was capable of not existing, than given an infinite amount of time.
There would have been a moment where nothing existed.
Right. And if there was ever a moment where nothing existed, then nothing would exist now. You can't get something from nothing.
Okay, that makes sense.
So since something clearly does exist now, Aquinas argues there must be at least one thing that is necessary, something that exists by its own nature and sustains everything else.
It's a very linear cause and effect view of reality.
Yeah.
Very Western, a distinct beginning. But when we look at our sources from the East, specifically the Buddhist texts, they just don't play by these rules.
No, it's a complete inversion. While Aquinas is obsessed with finding the first cause, Buddhist philosophy generally rejects the idea of a creator god entirely. They have this principle called pratityasamutpada.
Okay, let's break that down.
It translates to dependent origination, and it's the idea that nothing exists independently. Nothing has a separate self. A flower isn't a static object created by a god. It's a temporary convergence of soil, rain, sunlight, seeds.
You take away the soil, the flower is gone. It depends on conditions.
Correct. And this applies to the whole universe. It's a web. So there is no first cause because the system is cyclical. It's samsara, no definitive beginning.
But wait, I remember reading about gods in the Buddhist texts. I mean, specifically a figure called Brahma. If there's no creator, who is he?
This is one of the most fascinating parts of the analysis because it borders on cosmic comedy. In the Dika Nikaya, a Buddhist scripture, there's a story about the great Brahma. He's a powerful, long-lived being in a heavenly realm.
Okay, so he sounds like a god.
He does. But the text explains how it happened. At the start of a new world cycle, Brahma was simply the first being to be reborn into that realm because of his karma. He's there alone for a long, long time, and he starts to get lonely. He wishes for company.
And then other beings appear.
Yes, because their karma also led them to be reborn there, but because Brahma was there first and because he wished for them just before they appeared.
He thinks he created them.
He deludedly believes he created them, and the other beings, they see he was there first, so they believe him too.
So the creator god, in this view, is basically a guy who got to the party early and took credit for the guests.
That is the critique. He is powerful, but he is still subject to karma, birth, and death. He is not the necessary being Aquinas talks about. He's just another part of the cycle who is confused.
That is a fantastic way to frame it. So we have the logical creator versus the cyclical illusion. Let's jump forward a few centuries to how this plays out in the physical world. The fine-tuning argument.
This is where science and theology really start to blur. The fine-tuning argument is probably the strongest modern arrow in the believer's quiver. The observation is that the fundamental constants of the universe, the strength of gravity, the electromagnetic force, they seem perfectly calibrated for life.
The dials of the universe are set to a very specific frequency.
Precisely. If gravity were slightly stronger, stars would burn out way too fast for evolution. If the strong nuclear force were slightly weaker, atoms wouldn't even hold together. We wouldn't have carbon or oxygen or
us. So the argument is the probability of this happening by chance is so low, it has to suggest a designer. It looks rigged.
It does look wigged, but we have a countersource here, a physicist named Victor Stenger, and he is not buying this at all.
He thinks we're doing the math wrong.
Well,
he actually built a computer program to test this, didn't he?
he did. He called the code Monkey God.
Monkey God, okay.
It was a Monte Carlo simulation. He created a generator that could simulate thousands of theoretical universes and let the physics parameters, those dials, vary randomly.
To see what would happen. And did he get a bunch of dead universes?
That's what you'd predict. But Stenger found that life-permitting universes weren't actually that rare. He found that stars and complex chemistry could still emerge under different sets of physical laws.
So his point is that we're being carbon chauvinists. We look at our universe and say, life has to look like us, but maybe life could adapt to different rules.
Exactly. He argues we were confusing the laws of physics with, laws handed down by a deity. The puddle fits the hole, not the other way around.
Speaking of physics and deities, we have to talk about Albert Einstein. I feel like both sides try to claim him. We have his diaries here. Where did he actually land?
Einstein is the ultimate Rorschach test. But if you read his own words, he's very clear. He occupies a middle ground that frustrates both sides. He explicitly rejected the idea of a personal God.
Right, a God who interferes, answers prayers.
Yes. Or rewards and punishes. He called that the Santa Claus God. But, and this is a big but, he was also very critical of fanatical atheists. He said they were like slaves who'd thrown off their chains but were still obsessed with the weight of them. He thought they were missing the music of the spheres.
That's a beautiful phrase. What did he mean by that?
Einstein had what he called a cosmic religious feeling. It wasn't about a personality, it was about structure. It was a humble admiration for the illimitable superior spirit that reveals itself in the mathematical harmony of the universe.
So for him, doing science was the act of worship.
Yes, a deep humility, but it's not directed at a guy with a beard. It's directed at the architecture itself.
But this distinction between a perfect structure and a personal God, that brings us to the hardest part of this. Phase 3, the problem of evil.
This is the Epicurean paradox. If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, why is there suffering? It's the stumbling block for those logical arguments we discussed.
We read an excerpt from John Stuart Mill that was, well, it was brutal.
No, he doesn't pull any punches. Mill looks at nature and says, essentially, if a human did this, we would hang them.
Plagues, parasites, earthquakes.
Right. It acts with total indifference. Mill concludes that if there is a creator, he is either not all good or he is not all powerful.
And how does a theologian like Aquinas defend against that?
Aquinas typically relies on the greater good argument. The idea is that God allows evil to exist to bring about a higher form of good-like virtue or spiritual growth or free will.
A standard defense, but one that, as our sources note, rings pretty hollow to someone who just lost a child in a tsunami.
It does, and that emotional gap is what leads some people to stop looking for proof and start looking, well, an insurance policy. This brings us to Blaise Pascal.
Pascal's wager, the gambling approach to salvation.
Pascal was a mathematician, so he approached belief like a bet. He said, look, we can't know for sure, but weigh the odds. If you believe in God and he exists, you gain everything. If you believe and he doesn't, you lose nothing.
But if you don't believe and he does exist,
you lose everything. So Pascal argues, the only rational smart bet is to believe.
It sounds logical, but one of our sources points out a pretty big flaw. It questions that lose nothing part.
Right. The counter-argument is that you lose a lot. You lose your intellectual integrity. You lose time spent on rituals.
And historically, the source mentions, this kind of belief can lead to fanaticism.
Exactly. Which transitions us perfectly to the final phase, neurotheology. Let's look at the biology.
This is where the rubber meets the road, the search for God in the brain. I was fascinated by the God helmet experiments.
It sounds like science fiction. This was Michael Persinger's work. He built a helmet that used weak magnetic fields to stimulate the temporal lobes, and he found participants would report sensing a presence.
Like a ghost or God.
Some said God, some just said someone is in the room. The implication was huge. Is religious experience just a micro-seizure, a hiccup in our wiring?
But then came the rebuttal, the placebo issue.
Exactly. Later studies tried to replicate this double blind and found the presence was highly correlated with how suggestible people were. It implies the brain creates the experience based on expectation.
So there isn't a God switch we can just flip.
Not a simple one, but Andrew Newberg's research is much more compelling. He didn't use magnets. He used brain scans on people actually having deep spiritual experiences, Franciscan nuns, Tibetan Buddhists.
And he found something consistent.
He did. He didn't find a spot that lit up. He found a network. But the key was what deactivated. He saw a significant drop in activity in the parietal lobe.
Okay, for us non-neurosurgeons, what does the parietal lobe do?
It's your orientation center. It manages your sense of space and, crucially, your sense of self. It draws the line between you and everything else.
So if that area goes dark?
The boundary dissolves.
Yeah.
You physically, neurologically feel a sense of absolute oneness.
Which is exactly what mystics have described for thousands of years. We can actually see the biological mechanism for it.
We can. Now, the skeptic looks at that scan and says, see, it's just a brain state, a biological trick.
But the believer could look at the same scan and say,
if there is a God, wouldn't he design a receiver, an antenna built in to connect with the source?
The receiver theory. But we have to ask the evolutionary question, why would we have this antenna? What is the survival value?
Darwin suggested it arose from belief in unseen spiritual agencies. Today, scientists call this hyperagency detection.
Is this the tiger in the grass concept?
Exactly. You're an early human, you hear a rustle. You can assume it's the wind, a non-agent, or a tiger, an agent.
I assume it's the wind and it's a tiger. I'm lunch.
Correct. But if you assume it's a tiger and it's just the wind, you just look a little jumpy, you survive.
So evolution bred us to be paranoid. To assume there's a who behind every what?
Precisely. We see faces in the clouds and intentions in the weather because it kept us alive.
And once that belief exists, it becomes a social superglue.
Right. The sources mention that once you have a community believing in a big monitor in the sky, cooperation goes up. Religious communities often have higher fertility rates, better social cohesion. It's a survival mechanism for the group.
It's amazing. We've gone from Aquinas using logic to prove a first mover, to Brahma deluding himself he's that mover, to the brain wiring itself to find a mover so we don't get eaten by tigers.
And we end up with this strange synthesis. Because even in our most advanced physics quantum theory, we have this concept of the observer effect.
Right, the idea that you can't fully separate the observer from the observed.
It hints that the division between the mental world and the material world might be artificial.
So we're back to the Michelangelo painting. Is the brain creating reality, or is reality creating the brain?
That is the ultimate twist. We think we're analyzing the source code of the universe, but we might just be analyzing the source code of our own perception.
So where does this leave us?
I think it leaves us with a final provocative thought. Our brains are clearly hardwired to seek patterns. We're built to find unseen agencies in the grass and fine-tuning in the stars.
And the question is that hardwiring a flaw, a bug that makes us invent fairy tales?
Or is it a finely tuned antenna? Is the fact that we are wired to hear the music of the spheres evidence that the music is actually playing?
Is God a discovery or the ultimate invention of the human survival instinct?
That is the question the sources leave us with, and perhaps the answer depends on which part of your brain you're using to listen.
We'll leave you to mull that over. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the architecture of belief.
Keep asking why.